This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruitment podcast. And I am so excited to introduce to our global community today somebody who's actually just up the road from me in Manchester, it would appear. We could have got together. Who'd have known it? But I'm really excited to talk about a broad range of topics I'm expecting from our brief offline chat now, which I think every recruiter and every recruitment leader listening is going to need to want to know about and possibly get engaged with as well. This, without further ado, is Toby Mildon, who is the founder of Mildon, which is a business that helps HR, EDI, and senior leadership teams create frameworks to ensure that they're engaging, attracting, and retaining the best talent. Welcome to you today. How are you?
Thanks, Leisha. It's lovely to meet you. I'm doing really well, thanks.
I'm very pleased to hear it. So I possibly can't give you the best synopsis. And when I looked on your LinkedIn profile, I was like, wow, you have got a really awesome profile. So give us a potted history as to who you are and what you do.
So yeah, I've been running my own diversity and inclusion consultancy for the last 5 years. And but if we kind of go right back to the beginning, when I left university, I actually worked in technology. So
Oh.
I was an IT consultant for Accenture.
Mhm.
I worked in healthcare technology, implementing software into hospitals. And then I ended up at the BBC as a project manager on the BBC website and the what is now the BBC Sounds app and accessibility projects. And I fell into diversity and inclusion because I used to work really closely with the senior leadership team. And they were concerned at the time about the gender imbalance that we had in tech. So only 14% of our workforce were women compared to the rest of the BBC, which had a more or less a 50-50 sort of gender split. So to cut a long story short, they basically needed a project manager to execute a plan that they had come up with to attract and recruit more women into technology roles. And then I quickly learned a valuable lesson about diversity and inclusion, and that is that diversity is not just about one particular group of people. It's a very broad scope. So what was a 1 day a week job on a secondment turned into a full-time job.
Love it.
Um, yeah. And so yeah, that's where it really began. At the same time, I was running the BBC's Disabled Staff Forum because I was born with a disability. I'm a wheelchair user. And then I've been at the BBC for 10 years. And a friend of mine who's a leadership coach said, you do realize that if you stay in an organization for more than 10 years, you're officially institutionalized, which which scared
Oh
the shit out of me. So I
no.
was like, oh, I better get back into the corporate sector. So I went to go and work for Deloitte for a couple of years before setting up my own company.
Oh, I love your. I mean, that's hilarious. Do you think you would have been?
Um, Probably. I loved working for the BBC. It was a great organization. So
Yeah.
I don't think I would have minded being institutionalized at the BBC. It was,
I'd say I don't know if I don't know if there's any such thing as a job for life, but I think that their loss is our gain because clearly you've learned so much from it. What that was a very great potted history. You've clearly done a podcast before because you did it in a very succinct way, and thank you for sharing that with us. And I think that what you're alluding to when you mentioned that there's no one kind of particular diversity is the intersectionality, which most
Mm,
people don't realize that every single person listening has that. You know, we
yes.
just think that there's like you are LGBTQ plus or you are a person of color or whatever it might be. And actually that couldn't be further from the truth. So how do we anyone listening now, wherever they are, how do we understand what that actually means? And then we can then relate that further into the workplace.
Yeah, so intersectionality is one of those words that is becoming really quite a buzzword and is thrown around a lot around HR teams.
Mhm.
And what we mean by intersectionality really is the multiple layers of experience or prejudice or discrimination that somebody might face because they have multiple characteristics or identities.
Mhm.
So my experience as a openly disabled gay man is very different to somebody who's got the same condition as me, but was perhaps born British Asian, for example.
Yeah.
Um, because a friend of mine who's got the same condition as me, who's British Asian, will be on the receiving end of perhaps um, racial prejudice, whereas as a white person, I might not, be on the receiving end of that. So that's what we really mean by intersectionality.
Mm. And I think from a recruitment perspective, where I mean, I don't know how much involvement you have with our industry per se, but I think we're all working with employers at the end of the day, so it's an employment consideration. Up until the point where AI and technology has, I guess collided with how we as individuals have unconscious bias, it's where discrimination comes in. Where do you think, as we record this now, as we go into 2025? What opportunity do we have as recruiters to ensure that we are removing the unconscious bias that we all have, whether we all admit it or not, we all have it, and ensure that we are doing the best job by our clients, by the employees, but also by the candidates and applicants?
Yeah. So it starts with, first of all, raising awareness
Okay.
because unconscious bias is unconscious.
Hmm.
Um, it's often it influences how we think, how we feel, what we do, and our behaviors,
Yeah.
um, which then has a knock-on effect in terms of prejudice and discrimination and things like that. So, but first of all, we just need to raise the awareness about what it is, but I think also we need to dispel a lot of myths. We need to make sure that people don't feel bad about having bias because we all have bias. It's just part of being human. It's in part created just simply by the way that our brains are wired. For example, we have a safety bias, and that's just a way for us to protect ourselves,
Of course.
to keep out of danger. And
Yeah.
that's just the way that our brains are engineered. And you can see why that makes sense. Um, but also, we're hugely influenced by how we're influenced by society.
Mhm.
Um, and when I first learned about unconscious bias when I was working at the BBC, I did the Harvard Implicit Association test, and I found out that I was mildly biased against disabled people, which was quite surprising and shocking for me,
Yeah.
given that I have a disability. My brother's got the same condition. I went to school with disabled kids. I've worked with loads of disabled adults. I've got my fair share of disability in my life. Um, but really, that bias is created because I'm a product of the society in which
Yeah.
I've grown up in.
Mhm.
I've grown up in a society that's been largely designed by non-disabled people.
Mhm.
And as a disabled individual, I've just had to kind of fit into the mold. And
Mhm.
so we have these biases, they're very natural. They can help us in some situations, they can hinder us in others.
Yeah.
We just need to have the awareness about whether it's helping us or hindering us
Mhm.
in any given moment.
Yeah, I'm always really fascinated when I listen to podcasts and read books by really scientific people, philanthropists and psychiatrists and psychologists, and it's all about understanding the human condition, which ultimately is what we as recruiters do. It's we're in a
Mm,
human sector, that's what we are about. And I think to my day job, because I recruit for the recruitment industry, and I might contact a client, I've got to know this candidate inside out, and they've had somebody who's maybe been to a similar university or worked for a similar company, and straight away the client's going, no, we had a really bad experience with someone that worked from there before. And I'm like, that's not even
yeah,
uncommon. That's like as present as it can be. And I think, you know,
yeah,
I actually, I'm really glad that you answered it in the way that you did, because the elephant in the room is that very often that unconscious bias is actually our mechanism to keep us safe as humans from an evolution point of view, isn't it?
yeah, it is.
That you go to that berry bush at the end of your garden and you have the berries and you get them very sick. You ain't going back to that berry bush. And
Exactly.
and then you go to the next garden and you see a berry bush and think, is it the same one as that one? I'm not sure. I'll try again. So I think it is our human condition to trust our guts like that. But I think and I know from my conversations with Joe Major, it's moving away from hiring on that intuition and gut and making sure we're not closing the door on the best talent that could be out there and unlocking it, which I think we all need to do better as recruiters.
Definitely. I was talking about there around raising awareness, but actually, after you've raised awareness, what we really need to do is pick apart the recruitment process
Okay.
to find out where bias exists at different stages,
Okay.
um, and really break it down, and then start to think about what practical interventions can help mitigate against that bias. So,
Okay.
for example, let's say something like interviews, for example, if you run unstructured interviews, um, where you don't go in planned with your preset of questions, if you're just relying on your kind of instincts or your hunches, even as an interviewer, let's say you're just dashing from one interview to the next, which is really common, and you don't like catch your breath, you're going to be much more prone to bias than if you are able to chill out, relax, be quite, quite mindful in the moment with the candidate.
Mhm.
So there were some really practical things like sitting down with your colleagues and agreeing what interview questions you're
Yeah.
going to ask each of the candidates and having like a scoring matrix
Yeah.
so that you can objectively score candidates against the questions. Perhaps giving candidates like a technical challenge
Mm.
at the beginning of the recruitment process where they
Yeah.
can actually demonstrate that they've got the skills. And therefore, you've got an objective way of assessing candidates. You're not maybe relying so much on subjectiveness. So there's all these things that can be done. But anyone working in the field of recruitment, talent attraction just needs to take the time to audit the process end to end.
I think so often, and this is me being very candid, very often in our industry, we can be reactive hiring people for our own companies
Yeah,
because good recruiters are hard to find, good tech people are hard to find. It's usually where there's a skill shortage. You feel almost like I don't want to, it's the opposite of window shopping. It's almost like oh my God, we need to take this person on. What are your thoughts on the team involvement? So, let's say I interviewed somebody to work for myself, and it's really important to me that they get on and that there's a real click and there's a real respect from the people that I already have in my business. How subjective is that, do you think?
yeah.
I'm kind of seeing your facial expression back. I'm guessing it's very subjective.
Well, team involvement is really important than just relying on one
Yeah.
person doing the hiring, because generally speaking, the more opinions or perspectives you have, you're going to make a better decision. Like we know that the science around diversity of thought, cognitive diversity in terms of effective decision making
Yeah.
is there. Um, the thing you have to watch out for if
Yeah.
you're recruiting as a team is is just be mindful about whether your team is actually diverse. Because we know as human beings we have a similarity bias. We're drawn to people that are just like us.
Yeah.
There's that old kind of saying we hire in our own image. Um, and if that has been the legacy and you've ended up with a team that thinks along similar lines, that has this group think, if you like, then you're not necessarily going to make the best hiring decision.
Mm.
And the catchphrase to look out for is culture fit.
Mm.
Um, if ever you hear somebody say, so and so is not a culture fit for the team, that's usually code word for they're not like us.
Yeah.
And what we should be recruiting for is culture contributors, people that can contribute or add to the culture or live and breathe our values.
Mm.
That's what we should be aiming for.
Yeah. I've been saying culture add for a long time. I've never said
Mm,
culture. I'm chuckling away because I think that it is so the predetermined human condition to just be attracted to similar people, but all you do is create an echo chamber. All
yeah,
you do is, it's the whole who moved my cheese. You're just going to get the same results. And I don't want to have, and even though I know I've got my daughter working with me, people might look at us physically and go, right, it's for women, but actually we couldn't be more different. We've all got really different skill sets. We're all, some neurotypical, some neurodiverse, just a blend of people. And I've been on the receiving end of feedback. So, I mean, probably more times than I can even get a number of where a company has taken a candidate through a process and they've been rejected on those two words. They're not a culture fit. And we will
yeah,
literally, for years, even before the diversity and inclusion was something we were educated in or even thinking about, we'd be like, "What? How, are you crackers? Like, what are you talking about?" We've taken them through a process. They have the skills, they have the attributes. This is what they are bringing with them. This is not about someone slotting in and looking like everyone else stood against the wall. So I
yeah.
think we can be our own worst enemies in industry. I do
We
think.
can. Yeah, and culture fit is safe and comfortable. And so
Yeah,
and human beings like safety and we like comfort. Um,
yeah,
but the thing is, if you continue down that path, you're not going to recruit a diverse team. And what that means is that you are not necessarily the best at making decisions. You're
yeah,
going to have lots of blind spots. You're not going to be as creative and innovative as you could be. And in today's business world, we need to be as agile, as responsive, as tapped into our clients,
yeah,
building great rapport with our clients, um, being um, innovative and creative, and being really good at making decisions. So you have to have that diversity. And the thing, I don't want to sugarcoat this because actually managing a diverse team is harder than
mm,
managing a homogenous team. Like if you're a line manager and you want an easy life, then hire a bunch of people that are similar to one another. But if you want a high performing team, you're going to have a diverse team.
yeah.
There's no other way about it.
The data supports it. I mean, anyone that's listening to this now, I doubt you're just listening to this podcast. You're probably listening to a broad spectrum. And I would probably think the High Performance podcast with Jake Humphrey and Damon Hughes is one of them. And they often have guests on there who talk around high performance. They've had people from business world. There's Bruce Daisley's Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. He has a lot of
Mm,
culture specialists on there as well. And all the data shows that companies that have a truly diverse, particularly leadership team, but also productive teams, it's about having the most diversity. They're the ones that tend to have the best NFI, the best retention of their key performers. And I think that's the key thing, which moves me on, I guess, in a gorgeous segue into how do we create, if we've not already done so, a dialogue where it's about people that feel they belong. It's about, embracing our differences, ensuring that diversity is magnified in the best way, which, profit and people. But how do we
mm.
create, what's the starting point for making sure we feel that people belong in our businesses?
Um, as a leader in an organization, there's lots of different levers that you can pull. I think it probably starts with the old skills like active listening,
What'd you say,
really
Joe?
active listening.
It's a joke.
Oh, I get it now. It's like a
Sorry.
bit slow off the blocks there. Um, yeah, it begins with, really, really deep active listening, really taking the time to understand where people are coming from, what their day-to-day experiences are like, um, avoiding going in with an open mindset, um, having a learning orientation as a leader. What I mean by that is being curious, um, going in with an open mindset about different people, different backgrounds,
Yeah.
different circumstances. So that you've got those kind of softer skills that I think need working on. Um, but I think also giving people a sense of belonging, it goes back to things like respect. People should be respected for who they are.
Yeah.
People need to feel that they belong in the company. So part of that is that they see themselves reflected.
Mm.
When I talk to people that feel like they don't belong in an organization, quite often it's the day-to-day behaviors, it's those micro behaviors that mount up over time that make people feel like they're the odd one out, that they don't belong there. Um, Also, representation. Very often people go into an organization and they look up at the top of the organization and they don't see themselves.
Yeah.
And even this happens on a very instant unconscious level, they'll be telling themselves unconsciously, there's no future for me here. You
Mm.
know, I can't see a path. I can't see a way forwards for somebody like me in an organization like this. And they check out.
Yeah.
They either just don't perform very well in their role, or they end up leaving and working
Or
somewhere
they,
else.
or they call me. It's true.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think, I actually think you almost for that to ensure that you're creating all the things that you've just said, and you're the expert in this. I think personally, some of the best cultures I see is where the leadership team and possibly the founder or CEO, whatever, they share vulnerability
yeah, yeah.
and they don't have a guard about the decisions that they've made, and you get to know that individual and you get to know that board, you get to know the leadership team, whatever size of organization we're talking about. I think that's what you always have to go back a step and go, do people know who we are?
mm,
Because very often people, it's like, they don't know you've got kids, or they don't know you've got a disability, they don't know you've got a health condition, they don't know you've got mental health, whatever it might be. I'm
yeah,
not saying broadcasting it on LinkedIn, but actually that's how you create a sense of belonging. But this is who I am. This is my journey.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Sharing personal, and this is what we saw. I think this is one of the upsides that we saw with lockdowns and people working from home during the pandemic, that suddenly you got a glimpse into your CEO's living room, um, and you could see that I don't know, they lived in a messy living room, or
Yeah,
their kids were running around, or that they had a pet cat that kept walking across the keyboard. And then
absolutely.
and it was that kind of, yeah, you saw the human side of people. Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. I'm just chuckling because there's a couple of examples where we're talking like proper, C-suite, and we do a team call, and they would literally have their washing hanging in the background, and I'd be like,
Yeah.
you do know you can actually put a background on. I wouldn't say that, 'cause I don't care. I mean, I've always had, I've always kind of been really honest about my things. But I agree with you. If there's one positive that came from COVID, I agree that we kind of share more of ourselves. And I know that there's lots of things reversing, not least hybrid working seems to be in reverse, which, there are people listening who, whatever the level of like neurodiversity or disability, they're really finding it very challenging.
Mm.
And people that have, caring commitments, whether it's children, whether it's animals, whether it's family members. What are you seeing as a trend in terms of the hybrid versus? And I don't want people to roll their eyes at this. I think it's really important that we talk about it.
Yeah. The the thing that I keep hearing is this friction that's building up in organizations where leadership teams want people to return to the office, and they're starting to mandate it. And I'm seeing a whole spectrum where leaders are saying, okay, we need you in X number of days, or we need you on these fixed days, or that
Mm.
kind of thing. And I can understand the logic, because I do think that collaboration has become harder, and just that learning that you do from just bumping into somebody in the corridor, or overhearing a conversation in the office. Like, we are missing out on that with people working remotely.
Yeah.
And but on the other hand, there's lots of people that are actually more productive and happier
Mm.
working from home as well. Like, one of the first things that we started to see around the first lockdowns was that disabled people were saying it was easier to work because they didn't have to have the stress of commuting to and from work on an inaccessible transport system.
Mm.
Their home environment is usually much more accessible than their
Yeah,
work environment,
yeah,
and therefore they were a lot more happier and productive working from
yeah,
home. So
yeah.
there's kind of two sides to the story, and I think organizations are really struggling with trying to find the
The
happy medium at the moment. Yeah,
Yeah. I get asked this probably. I still get asked this probably more than any other question, and that's from both sides of the desk. And I think my absolute resolute answer is it is not one size fits all. You have to
yeah,
ask the people, and I do think that leaders and business owners are in a real quandary because they've probably it actually comes down to their either they own their building, or they're renting a building, they're leasing a building, and it is the cost per head of having that space. That's what it actually comes down to. It's a commercial reason. Usually, it's not actually because somebody's more productive in the office. But I agree with all the things you've said. I mean, the fact is, we learn through osmosis. Human beings need interaction. But that's where I always recommend, if you wanted to, pin me down now and say, what is the best solution? If you can only answer one way, you can't give this kind of, vanilla answer leash. My answer would be, I do think anchor days work, because then there's an expectation. You've got everybody in, rather than saying some come in this day, some come in this day. So it's, these are the anchor days, just maybe even one day a week where
mm,
you've got that connectivity, and you give people that empowered choice to then come if they want to, which I realize, again, we have a problem around space. How much space do you need? But I think then what it conversely does is that people then feel like they want to come in on the days that they maybe don't have to come in. You're just creating an
yeah,
choice, aren't you? I actually think we'll still be talking about it in 10 years. I really do. But the robots can drive us in, yeah? It's fine. We'll get
exactly.
driverless cars to pick us up.
But I think the pandemic only shone a light on this and accelerated probably what was happening anyway, because we started to see a shift in working in terms of flexible working, um, and really the rise of the gig economy as well. So
Agreed.
using um, yeah, basically working with self-employed people anywhere in the world. So I think the trend was going in there anyway. And then with the introduction of things like, machine learning, AI, robotics, that's only going to accelerate things further as well.
No, I agree with you. Everything you said, I agree with totally. You have been, and we've not spoken before, Toby, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think you're absolutely great. So, we will make sure everybody has contact information for you all over the channels, which is on the link that you will have clicked on this to watch or listen. Make sure you give us a follow and like it, and drop Toby a message if you want to know how he can assist your organisation and his consultants, presumably. And is there anything else you want to share with us before we go, Toby?
No, it's just been really great to catch up with you. I could have we could have chatted for ages, couldn't we? So,
We
yeah,
definitely, we definitely
maybe we'll
could have.
do
And
episode two.
I'm very pleased that we got somebody on that's so passionate about it. And I think you've got a great simplified way of actually talking about something that a lot of recruiters overcomplicate, and there's no need to. So thank you so much for joining us on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast.